Hey 12. So in this video I'm going to talk about how to write and structure your research task for free foods. So I'm actually starting on page 3 here and I'm just going to read out the research section and which requirements or specific design criteria from the rubric I'm looking for. So food allergies and special dietary requirements are becoming more and more common in Australian society, ranging from life-threatening allergies to lifestyle and ethical dietary choices. There is an increased awareness of these dietary requirements and a growing number of food products to cater for them. For this reason, food and hospitality establishments need to be up to date and offer options for their customers that have dietary requirements. Choose someone you know with a dietary requirement, e.g. gluten-free, vegan, nut-free, etc. So that's the person, the teacher you've chosen out of a hat. Research their dietary requirement and analyse its impact on food and hospitality establishments. In your analysis, include headings such as kitchen practices, staff knowledge, and menu planning. You can also include the customer perspective of the person you've chosen with the dietary requirement if you choose. Analyse relevant primary and secondary sources to support your findings. It is suggested to use a combination of primary and secondary sources. So that's why we're going on the excursion. That will give you one primary source, and also the person that you cook for will become your second primary source, and then it's up to you if you want to add more than that, but having two is enough to get into the A band. Appropriate acknowledgement of sources is also expected. This includes in-text referencing and a full reference list. Because it's a research task, this is really important. You will definitely need to have your two primary sources and probably at least another 5 secondary sources, okay, for a good solid reference list. So I'm now going to go down to page 5. Research task, and talk about how we're going to structure this. So it's obviously very different to an action plan, but it is the same in that it's 500 words and no more. So you still need to be very concise and to the point while getting in as much detail as possible. Research tip, again, is just reminding you that primary research is very valuable. Okay, you'd be silly if you come on the excursion and you don't use that as a primary source. First of all, the aim. Okay, from the task sheet, you just need to copy and paste the aim. Introduction. So you're going to start off with a short paragraph explaining the dietary requirement you've chosen and any important background information. So a brief outline of, and any background information. So you want to define what that dietary requirement is. Okay, so if you've got someone who is dairy free, what does that mean they can and cannot eat? Specifically, or is there any severe kind of health implications if they do happen to eat dairy, etc. Someone's celiac, what does that mean? What can and can't they eat? So just that really brief background, don't use too many words, but just to set the scene. The next bit should be a brief outline of the implications on the food and hospitality industry, basically introducing what you're going to be writing about next. So from here, you have 4 different options. I want you to choose 2 to 3 of them max. So your 4 options are in the black here. So kitchen practices, staff knowledge and training, menu planning, and food identifications on menus and menu boards. Okay, let's go back up to the start. There's some information. Oh, and conclusion, a brief summary, and making sure you've got your reference list at the end. So if you were to choose kitchen practices, all right, first of all, you want to acknowledge how does catering for a dietary requirement affect this part of the business? Okay, so again, focusing on the dietary requirement that you have got to cook for. Right, so if it's vegetarian, how does catering for vegetarians affect kitchen practices? All right, so it doesn't mean having separate areas in the kitchen for different ingredients, things that are vegetarian, things that are not. Doesn't mean specific equipment, right? Doesn't mean separate storage areas or having to wash things in between use, knives, for example. What changes does a business have to make, or what do they need to ensure to make sure that they can say that the dishes are vegetarian, for example? To ensure their food is safe for customers with a dietary requirement. Yep, so what things do they need to change for when someone comes in who has a dietary requirement? And then you would have some primary examples. So this is sort of your background information. You might say the kitchen practices that are impacted by a vegetarian customer include ... and They would need to ensure, etc., to make sure that they can clearly say their dish is vegetarian and being honest with the customer. So-and-so from the Nourish Kitchen explains their vegetarian dishes are prepared in such a way. All right, so your primary source is backing up, hopefully, what you found in your secondary research, or if it goes against it, that's okay. You might simply say, on the other hand, so-and-so from the Nourish Kitchen has a different view and says that their vegetarian dishes are simply prepared in whatever fashion, okay? So in each of these paragraphs, so each dot point that you choose, you need to have some secondary and some primary examples as well. And there is another example here just to get you started with wording. In the kitchen, catering for a customer that requires a gluten-free diet requires, etc. For the kitchen and kitchen staff, this means they need to. For example, at Cafe Green, the chef explains, we ensure food is gluten-free when required by, etc., and making sure you've got the reference for the secondary and for the primary stuff as well. Now, I'm going to change this from, it says 3 to 4, I'm going to say 2 to 3, simply because for you to go in depth enough, it is quite hard to do that while choosing 4 of those headings. So I would say 2 to 3. If you're someone that goes over the word count a lot, stick with 2. If you aren't too bad with word count, perhaps you can choose 3. All right, staff knowledge and training. So this is all about when there's someone new to the business or the cafe or the restaurant, are they adequately trained to deal with people who have dietary requirements? So this can be anyone from waiters and waitresses to front of house staff like maitre d' who seat people and help them out, people working in the bar, people who are kitchen hands, all right? So do they receive any training or do they learn on the job? And it is quite okay if you find that there isn't much formal training to conclude and say, well, more training perhaps needs to be put in place. So once again, how does catering for a dietary requirement affect this part of the business? What changes do they have to make to ensure the food is safe? And some primary examples. Now, your primary sources, like I mentioned, don't have to be from the cafe or the restaurant perspective. They can actually be from the customer perspective. So you may choose to include quotes from the person you're cooking for. All right, they might give you a really valuable quote saying that I've had mixed experience. In some places, the staff are very well trained and accommodating and know what I can and can't eat, which is what is and what isn't dairy free. However, I've had bad experiences where the staff obviously aren't trained and don't know what is dairy free and what isn't, and therefore this makes me concerned. All right, so you can have primary examples from the customer but also from the cafe perspective. Either is fine. You might have both in one paragraph. Menu planning. Okay, so once again, how does catering for dietary requirements affect this part of the business? Do they need to plan their menu around different dietary requirements, making sure they've got plenty of options? Do they need to make any changes, have a separate menu perhaps for people with dietary requirements? I know some places like Cafe Primo have a separate gluten-free menu. Again, primary examples from either the customer perspective or the cafe restaurant perspective. And the last option, food identification on menu boards. Okay, how does catering for this dietary requirement affect this part of the business? So do they include food identification? Do they have the little symbols, you know, the V, the GF, etc. on their menus? What does this mean for printing and publishing the menu? What does this mean? Every time they prepare a dish that is supposed to be gluten-free, they have to therefore ensure it is gluten-free. If it says GF on the menu, everyone who orders it will be expecting it to be gluten-free, not just those who request it. And again, a primary source. Now, food identification is the sort of thing where you can observe that without actually having to speak to someone. So when we're on the excursion, you might like to do some menu observations up and down the Norwood Parade to see if some cafes and restaurants in fact do use this system and how it's used, and you might like to use some of your own primary examples that you've observed for your primary source for this one. Conclusion, 1 to 2 sentence brief summary. Is the dietary requirement having a big impact on the food and hospitality industry, or is it perhaps not having a big impact? Just summarise basically what you found and making sure this is really important. Full reference list and in-text referencing. Okay, if you don't like doing that, it is absolutely worth it. It is very, very hard to get anything above a C- or a D if you don't include in-text referencing. It's an absolute must. All right, hopefully that helps and it's made sense. Good luck.